Hello! Is it working?
Hello.
It is working. Hello, Uridoz. So I'm doing a weird
Oh, yes.
podcast thing again. I'm doing it today with my friend Uridoz, who is one of the AV organizers for Paris, a big city. And we met on the internet about a year ago. And Uridoz is one of the reasons, one of the people who sort of introduced me and inspired me to go to activism. So I'm very glad to be doing this interview. Uridoz, hello.
Hello. So where do we want to start?
What? Let me let's start at the beginning. I suppose. Why not? Where you spawned. Where did you spawn in life?
Yes, the timeline. So I was born in southern France in Avignon, which is it's not too far away from Marseille, like about an hour in a car drive. Fun fact: it's a city where the popes from Italy had to flee there for a while during a time of let's say instability. So we have huge medieval constructions over there, including a huge building called the Palace of the Popes. Should visit it someday if you can.
I
Pretty
have.
city.
I've already been.
Uh,
I have. I'll tell you about that story one day. It was wild. Yeah.
So yeah, I was born in southern France 27 years ago at this point. I was born to basically parents were not French per se. My dad essentially was the children of Spanish immigrants, and my mom came from an English-speaking part of Canada, which is also why I have a decent English, despite the fact I was born in France,
Mhm.
which is not that common, unfortunately. And so, yeah, I mean, do you want me to talk about my relationship with animals, being young, stuff like that, perhaps?
Yeah. So what? I don't know what age you went vegan. What did you go vegetarian first, or did you go straight vegan?
So, oh yeah. So basically, I'm 27 today. I went vegan when I was 20.
Okay.
But the thing is, what's interesting is that when I was 18, I remember talking to my girlfriend at the time, and I mentioned, yeah, I think I want to go vegetarian someday because if we can not harm animals unnecessarily, that's just better. So, like, I was already agreeing with the principle. The reason why I was saying vegetarian is because I had a biology teacher in high school that essentially misrepresented nutrition and especially the aspect of proteins. She basically told the class that you need animal protein in order to get all the essential amino acids, which is just wrong and bullshit. And so as a result, I thought that veganism was essentially an unhealthy cultish habit. Like it was actually extreme and insane because it wasn't feasible and practicable. So that's why I said vegetarian at the time. Now, the thing is, because I didn't live in a society that encouraged me to really think about it that much, and it was kind of something that came out of me like this, like I didn't do it. And it took another 2 years where I got a bit more invested in communities online that were interested in philosophy and ethics. Where eventually I met someone who was vegan, and after like a conversation with friends of mine who were not necessarily vegan, by the way, but who taught me a bit more about the nutritional aspect and such, I realized, well, okay, well, it's actually possible to be vegan. It's a feasible thing to do. And after having a few conversations on the ethics, where to be fair, I wasn't hard to convince because hey, I agree that hurting animals, if it's unnecessary, that's a bad thing. But at some point, I had someone saying to me, "Well, if you agree that it's the right thing to do, why don't you do it?"
And you didn't.
And well, yeah, I didn't have any excuse. Like it was just like there was just a long moment of silence when I said, "Yep, yep." I mean, yeah, I got to do it because I just didn't have any excuse. So I think that's an interesting point to bring up. Is that the reason why I went vegan? Is because I was receptive to the idea, but no one was holding me accountable when it comes to the inconsistency between my values and my actions.
So while you were having these ethical discussions about which eventually led you to go vegan, you were doing some sort of like studies, some sort of biology thing.
Yeah. So I was finishing my bachelor's degree in biology, and so at this time I was doing an internship that involved animal testing, and I think that it may be possible that one of the reasons why I went vegan is because I wanted to compensate for the guilt of what I had to do essentially in this internship.
Okay.
So this might be trigger warning for some people. So maybe skip ahead for like I don't know. You'll put the timestamp hopefully.
I will.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll put a trigger. Go on. I can do that. I'll put a trigger warning timestamp. Let's go.
Yeah. So the thing is, I was essentially put in a position where I had to force rats to run on treadmills, where if they would not run properly, they would get on the grid with electric shocks for hours on end when they barely had proper training. And the goal of the exercise was to exhaust their heart as much as possible to evaluate their heart function after that. So I would have to force those rats to run. They would spend like a significant amount of time by the end just on the grid, just taking the shocks because they could just not possibly physically continue to run. And after that, they would get essentially euthanized, and their heart would be taken out and plugged into a bunch of little pumps going into it to keep it beating.
Wow.
And they would evaluate the heart function like this.
And you were doing this as a 19-year-old, a 20-year-old?
20-year-old. Well, I was doing the running part, like the handling the hard part. That was the master students. But
sorry, go on.
Yeah, pretty traumatizing stuff to like be forced to you have to force some poor animals to essentially push way beyond reasonable limits. And
this was part of your degree, right? Or what was this part of?
It was part of my internship, and the part that really fucking sucks is that we're talking about Wistar rats. Like, those animals are like among the most innocent beings you can imagine. They're not aggressive. They don't bite. Mice in labs, oh yeah, they can be atrocious. They will take a piece of your finger off if they can. Mm-hmm. Those rats are docile as hell,
and that's presumably why they're studied, right? Because it's like beagles, right? Beagles are used for animal testing because they're very complicit animals.
Precisely, they're so easy to handle. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time, maybe that's a story I can tell, where I had, like, there was another time where I made a rat run, and this rat, like others, they would sometimes have broken claws, like they would have a bit of blood and such I had to clean up. I'm not even joking, it's atrocious. And I just held this rat. I knew they were going to be euthanized. I was waiting for the intern, essentially, to give the lethal injection of pentobarbital. And I just held this rat in between my lab coats. Mm-hmm. And just kept it warm there to help it calm down a little bit. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, when this rat was euthanized, it was super calm about it. Like, no jumping or anything compared to all the others. Mm-hmm. And the intern was looking at me, and she looked at the rat, and she was like, he was so calm about it. What the hell? And I was like, yeah, I just treated it like, a thing with feelings. Like, I just calmed it down. And made my lab coat, I just held it for a while. So I think that it's sad.
Did he have a name, Mr. Rat?
He didn't have a name, but I think that what it shows is that, like, even in such circumstances, yeah, at the end of the day, they remain sentient beings, and I think that what happens in people who have to test on animals in labs is a very similar mechanism to slaughterhouse workers, in the sense that in order to deal with a lot of that stuff, especially experiments like those, you have to shut down your compassion in order to be able to do it. And I think I just couldn't do it. And maybe, like, the guilt of what I did to animals and interacting with animals directly that were exploited and killed for something that was arguably more justifiable than taste pleasure, right? Like, at least it's for medical research and such.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah.
And even that, I wasn't comfortable with it. So perhaps it got the gears turning when it comes to something that was completely trivial, as taste, pleasure, and convenience. I think that maybe the guilt and the comparison and the perspective helped push me, to push me towards veganism. I suspect that is most likely the case.
Yeah. Oh, well, at least you made me cry once on this podcast, then.
I'm sorry.
So did you go vegan overnight? Like, did you stop eating animal products at that day and never start ever again?
Okay, so no, because I was living at my parents' place, and I was also going to the university restaurant where, at best, I had, like, vegetarian options. For about a month, I was vegetarian. However, from the very beginning, I knew that until I stopped eating animal products, I was basically not reaching, a moral baseline. It was the bare minimum is to not abuse animals. So I was fully aware that until I didn't end my consumption of animal products entirely, I was not consistent with my beliefs.
Okay. So this was 20 years old, right? You were 20 at this point? Okay. And so, having just gone vegan, presumably these friends that sort of spoke to you about this were vegan?
Yeah, some of them were. Were not. So, like, one of my friends who actually educated me a lot on the nutritional aspect, it was a kind of a weird situation where B12 supplements actually caused them some form of bad reaction.
Interesting.
So yeah, I don't know what was up with that, but essentially, they couldn't do it, practically speaking, because just taking a bunch of B12 at once was bad for them.
Yeah.
I still haven't identified the reason. I'm not really talking to this person anymore, but.
Okay, but
like, they agreed with the idea.
So are you still friends with any of those people who made you vegan then?
So the thing is, like, actually, I don't really talk to them that much. Like, I could get back in touch with the person who really asked me the hard question. But no, not really. I mean, I'm kind of yeah. I mean, for all I know, they're not even aware that I'm still vegan to this day.
Oh, I think maybe send them a message one day and just say, by the way, you made me vegan, and I've been vegan for 7 years, and I'm a vegan activist. Thank you so much. Right? It sounds like a
Yeah, that
wonderful
would be nice.
birthday present. You know?
Yeah, I guess someday I'll have to fucking stalk their social media and start to figure out what's the birthday to know what day to send it.
Yeah. So so the reason I asked that is because like most people when they go vegan, they're sort of alone. But I suppose you had a little bit of a luxury in that someone else made you vegan. So you presumably had at least one person.
Yeah, but like they didn't really, on a practical level, they didn't do much to guide me through the process, really.
Hmm. But
Um, like I, like I was kind of on my own for at least a year, I would say, and plus like the next year after that,
mhm.
I was in a really bad spot psychologically speaking because I was in a master's degree in education that I was not enjoying at all,
Okay.
and I felt like my life was going nowhere.
Hmm.
Like probably like in the top two worst years of my life.
Okay.
And the thing is, I just kept doing it because like I knew it was the bare minimum to just not abuse animals. So even though I was feeling like shit
Uh-huh.
and my mental health was in the gutter, sometimes I would just like cook some white rice and just open a can of beans and add some beans to that and just add a bit of spices and just eat that. Um, because I
Yeah.
just refuse to eat animal products. Like fuck no.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you understood like looking after animals wasn't something you were doing that was a kindness. It was like the bare minimum, right? It was a requirement, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. 100%.
Exactly.
So when did you sort of find community then? If you weren't lucky enough to have it from the offset, like when did you start? Because you're now a organizer of AV, right? So like, when did you find your community? When did you?
So yeah, so it was mostly through the internet at first. So I always had some people from a distance. But when it comes to stuff face to face,
Mhm.
I think it really started when I moved to Angers to do one of my first master's degree.
Okay.
And they had some street activism over there where earthling experience. So for people who are not familiar in the audience, essentially you're just holding screens and signs talking about animal exploitation. It's like it's not as well planned and organized as what I'm doing today. Like
Mhm.
the efficiency of it was way lower, but I still had some conversations out there in the street. I still was able to meet people face to face who were vegan.
Mhm.
So that was the first group I had for sure.
Mhm.
And then there was kind
And
of a pause for a while, and then
wait,
I
sorry.
and
How
I
did you find them? How did you end up finding them? Like, did you choose?
probably yeah I probably just went on Facebook
Uh,
when I showed up in the city like, oh, what are vegan groups, and they probably showed up as activist groups, or maybe I just asked someone and they say, oh, there's this, probably something like that. I don't have the exact memory, I'm sorry.
that's okay. Do you remember like your first? Like, do you remember like when you showed up? Like, how many people there were? Do you remember? Do you remember anything about your first event?
Actually, no, like it was probably like 5 or 6 people or seven or something.
Uh huh.
And the fun part is that uh, I am now an organizer for AV, right?
Uh huh.
In that period of my life, I only did one cube because a guy tried to open up a group,
Uh huh.
and it was like three of us, and like you can actually find online a picture of me with the mask holding the screen in the street. So like there's actual historical evidence of my first cube. That's funny. It's not my first street activism, but it's
It was
out
your
there.
first cube. Yeah, yeah. I have a picture from my first cube as well. Well,
But
AV was
like
my first
mine is
event.
accidental. Oh, yeah, it was your first event as well. That's cool. That's
Yeah, yeah.
awesome.
So I think you mentioned earlier, like that your mum might have sort of started going plant based, because you spoke to her like in about this time. So like, how did that work? What like because most of us don't have vegan parents, like or even like vaguely vegan parents. So how was your experience with that?
So the thing is, like, first of all, my mom is an awesome person.
Mhm.
Like statistically speaking, she is way more compassionate and altruistic than the average human being by far.
Mhm.
And the thing is, since I was a little kid, she always taught me, hey, like it's important to respect others, uh, and that also included animals, right?
Mhm.
So I think that in many ways, like she taught me to eat meat because it was just a normal thing to do. She brought me to the zoo because that was a normal thing to do. She even brought me to the circus where I was riding elephants because it was just normal, right?
Yeah.
Because she never really had this fresh perspective of questioning it that
Mhm.
much. Um, but the thing is, as soon as I brought up the topic and I explained my reasons, and I explained how it was feasible in practice to not eat animal products and to still be healthy and such,
Mhm.
she was never hostile to the idea. If anything, she just wanted to adapt to try to make it work for me.
Mhm.
And I think that through hearing me on the topic, as we had discussions, like we even watched Dominion together, through all of this, and also picking up, it was also more convenient for her to just eat plant-based when making plant-based food for me. Mm-hmm. And so that just shifted her habits, and yeah, at this point she gets it. Essentially, she's supportive. She even came to see me doing activism sometimes.
Wow, how did that go? That sounds really cool.
So not only she thinks the activism is really good and interesting, like she supports it, but on top of that, she has had discussion with other activists, whether it's in southern France or in Paris, and she can see that it's like, yeah, it's like interesting people who are, they're compassionate, they're, they just think that they're not bad people to spend time with.
Yeah.
That it's quite the opposite. Like, if anything, it's good that I have people like this in my life through activism.
Yeah.
So even when it comes to that, she has no problem with it. So yeah, she's pretty supportive. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm very jealous. Well, but presumably, I don't know if I should ask. But like, have you had any successes with the rest of your family, or is that the same experience as everyone else?
I think it's the same experience as with everyone else. Like they will accommodate, like they will try to make sure there's an option. Mm-hmm. But I don't think they really get the ethics of it. Even though, like, I try to explain it, and although no, actually no, that's wrong, because I do have a cousin. Mm-hmm. He's 16 years old. He's in high school right now. It fucking sucks. High school sucks. But basically, yeah, like we've been talking about the topic for a while, and even when I have discussions with non-vegans where they say completely insane shit just to remain consistent in their position and a moral framework, I can send that shit to him and he will laugh his ass off, like, alongside me. I am very convinced that the day where he will do his own groceries and he'll essentially not be dependent on other people to buy the food for him and everything, he'll go vegan.
That's good. I think it's easier oftentimes with, like, sort of early teenagers or like late teenagers, I suppose. Especially if you're seen as like sort of a slightly older role model.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you go back in a timeline, essentially he's probably been hearing me talk about this topic since he was 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, that's really cool. So you mentioned online spaces. Let's go into that first, because that sounds interesting. Because So when did you start doing online stuff?
So online stuff, I mainly do activism on Discord, sometimes Reddit, sometimes Facebook. Mm-hmm. But the main idea is that there's different approaches to it. Like, first of all, there's the very toxic job of having interactions with non-vegans through text on social media. That's horrible, because people tend to, like, they don't see your body language, they don't see they don't hear your voice, they don't hear the tones. They might imagine sarcasm and toxicity anywhere, especially because they're already, on the defensive when it comes to their attitude. So you get to deal with a lot of bad faith and such, although I had some productive conversations. So I would say that when it comes to the text side of social media, it's more so useful to convince people who are already vegan to get into activism. So I have many instances where I will go on Reddit, for example, on the vegan sub or any other community related to veganism, where someone will mention feeling kind of lonely and isolated as a vegan. And, like, they wish they could do more, but like they kind of feel powerless about the situation. And, I just send them a message, whether I comment or I send them a DM. And I basically explain to them, hey, like if you don't mind, where's your location?
Because I've sent that message a few times.
Give me your location. Because, like, unironically, there are resources you can find online. You have the Animal Rights Map, for example, websites from the Vegan Hacktivist Project. And you also have a list of different cities on other organizations such as We the Free or AV, where they have a very convenient map where you could just zoom in on wherever you live in the world. And sometimes there's a group that's not too far away from your place, and you can just go there. Yeah. And only you can actually do something and help the animals and help the world become a little bit less shitty place, So that can help. But also, hey, you can meet up with other vegans that can actually understand where you're coming from, and they understand why you think it's fucked up that people are just, buying pieces of corpses of animals, in stores and such.
Yeah. So did you start? Presumably, you must have been going to activism before you started sending DMs to people on the internet to go and do activism. But did you do anything? You said you did stuff on the internet prior to going to activism. So like, what was your first sort of like foray onto the internet looking for other vegans?
Probably some overall like cringy keyboard warrior thing that I still do to this day. I,
Okay.
I I think another aspect that's relevant to bring up is activism on vegan servers that allow you to have discussions through through voice chat with non-vegans.
Okay.
So sometimes I do the stage on Vegan World, for example, where you
Uh-huh.
can do Q&A and you can just invite people on stage and, hey, like, what can I do for you today? And people can ask questions and such. So I had some really productive conversations through this. And it's really interesting because it's not just the person you're talking to, it's also the audience.
Yeah.
And most of the time, those people are going to bring up questions that are pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably going to answer questions that a lot of people in the audience may also have about veganism and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've seen you do quite a few stages.
I
And
should go back. I
also,
should do more.
yeah, did you ever do the Omegle stuff?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay.
But uh, okay, yeah. Have you talked about this on the channel before? Because maybe we should give some context to that.
Yeah. So the Omegle thing is like a bot where it randomly puts you with another person on Omegle and you back chat them. And I don't think I've ever seen you do that, but I've seen you do a lot of stages, so I just wanted to make sure. But
Yeah, that is correct.
I don't think I've spoken about stages, so you described them pretty well. But basically, it's like a public Discord server where one person is the host and they're the vegan, and they keep in like having different non-vegans come up to speak to them one on one while the entire audience listens, and you sort of go through people one at a time. And I've seen you do a few of those, and I thought you were very good. Um, have you had any like sort of major successes on there? Like, was anyone on Vegan World like continually not vegan, and then one day they wrote to you saying I'm vegan now? Or
So the thing is,
uh-huh.
I had interactions live where someone was asking, for example, about eggs,
Uh-huh.
and I explained the whole thing of the culling of the male chicks and the
Uh-huh.
fact that egg-laying hens are most often killed at a fraction of their natural lifespan. And after me explaining, like there was someone from Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and they were really shocked about what I was saying. They were kind of skeptical about it, which is fair. They should be.
Uh-huh.
And they were saying, yeah, but like there's no maceration and gassing of the chicks in my country. And I just pulled out my browser. I just typed male chick culling.
Uh-huh.
And the thing is, like, the Wikipedia article is really well made because it actually gives you a map of the world.
Wow.
And they have a color code for every country that corresponds to different categories.
Uh-huh.
And one of the categories is countries that have maceration of chicks as a legal thing to do, and they have no plan to ban it.
Okay.
And Canada was among them. And there was even
Wow.
a specific paragraph about Canada. So I basically read that to them. I sent them the link,
Uh-huh.
and there was a moment of silence for like 5 seconds, and they say, "Okay, how do I go vegan?"
Wow. That's wild.
That was probably like the fastest I've seen. But I think there's many other conversations where like the gears are turning. It was
Yeah.
productive. But that was the quickest one.
That's really cool. I don't think I've ever really had that on Vegan World. I've had a lot of I know I've planted a lot of seeds on there, but I don't think I ever had a vegan moment on Vegan World. So that's really cool.
Well, I mean, I think what's really cool is that there's some people on Wikipedia doing articles about male chick culling, and they do their research and they do specific information for
True.
a few countries. Because without that, I don't think I could have had this impact. So hey,
So
it's teamwork.
what you're saying is that's the person I should interview next. The person who made that Wikipedia article.
I don't know. I mean, how would you? I mean, how do we even find people who make
Maybe
edits
that's what
on
they.
Wikipedia
After
articles?
this, that's my pet project. I'm gonna go look for that person. I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, I'm
So
not familiar enough with Wikipedia to give you advice here.
I think if you can see who edited the article, right? They have like a little code. I'm sure I can work it out. I'm a
Probably
clever girl. I can work it out. So
you can, yeah.
that was your foray into internet activism. Right? When did you start getting into? I know you've told me your first like sort of cube with Earthlings,
Mhm.
but when did you sort of start doing like AV properly? Then when did you get into doing it like on the regular?
So the thing is, I was done with my two master's degrees. I was back in my hometown, kind of figuring out what the fuck I do with my life at this point,
Uh-huh.
and applying for jobs and such.
Uh-huh.
And in the meantime, my mom, she was walking around in the city center, and she just came across a cube from the local chapter.
Okay.
So she went back home and she told me about it, and so I got in touch with him, and so I joined him, and that's it.
Wow, and you've been doing it regular ever since?
Really, regularly, nonstop, pretty much. And in between, I moved to Paris, right, because I'm in Paris. I moved to Paris because I found a job, a trial period in a company, a startup that does lab grown foie gras.
Wow. Okay.
And so as a result of this, I moved to Paris. But I was, because of the networking, I was able to get in touch with a local group immediately. So as soon as I was in Paris, I was also doing activism there.
Okay. And just because the rest of us don't have a wonderful French accent, but you just said foie gras, the force-fed duck liver. Is that what it is?
Yep, correct. Yeah. There's a startup in Paris called Gourmet.
Uh-huh.
And so what they do is essentially is they cultivate duck cells in order to essentially recreate foie gras with those cells instead of abusing ducks.
Uh-huh.
And with a combination of, I won't go into the details because first of all I can't, but with a combination of cell culture and food science and everything, they essentially managed to produce a product that, according to chefs, is indistinguishable from the real thing.
Wow. Is there any cruelty involved whatsoever, or would you call it vegan?
So I won't give any specific information about the company, but I can get into different strategies that companies that want to get into lab grown meat can adopt when it comes to how do you actually make lab grown meat.
Uh-huh.
And the
I would just like to say at this point that you have 2 master's degrees in biology?
Yeah, correct. I have one master's degree in health biology and vascular pharmacology and physiopathology, and I have another one in human nutrition
Okay, so you're
from two
pretty well
different French.
qualified to speak about this. Is what I'm saying, and it's very
Well,
interesting to hear you and your opinions on it.
it's not directly related to the main theme of my master's degrees, but yeah, I mean, I can talk about cell culture because I have experience with this to some extent.
Uh-huh.
So essentially, yeah, if you want to do cell culture to the point where you do lab grown meats, of course, the first question is where do you get the cells from?
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to obtaining stem cells, there's two options. Either you can get them from an embryo, or what you can do is that you can take some cells that are already differentiated and you can essentially reprogram them to behave like stem cells again. Those are called induced pluripotent stem cells.
Okay.
So those are two different techniques you can have. So if you, from on a fundamental level, the way you can obtain cells for lab grown meat is you can basically do a biopsy on an animal. You could even do it on a human, hell,
Human
and
fragua.
yeah, and you can take cells such as fibroblasts, and essentially, yeah, you can reprogram them through various means to express four different genes that play a key role in making them behave like stem cells.
Okay.
And so at this point, you can basically do whatever you want with them. So that's the least invasive option, arguably. Although a biopsy is not like we do this on people, for medical
Yeah.
reasons, but it's still invasive. It's still exploitative.
And would those biopsy gathered cells last indefinitely, or would you have to keep regathering them?
That's a good question because it may be the case that after a while, like if the cells keep multiplying for too long, you can have a batch that eventually runs out. So like one thing you can do is like you can have an early population of cells. Like once you get a population of cells that's promising,
Okay.
you can make a bunch of it, and then you can freeze a bunch of small samples. So you can start from an older generation and just keep it in liquid nitrogen for years on end.
Okay.
So possibly, yeah, it can be long term, like decades. I would say, probably.
Okay.
Just from one. The embryo parts, okay. So the thing is, when it comes to the embryo, if you have to obtain an embryo, the least invasive method is to get it from an egg. So if we're talking about doing lab grown meat with animals such as fish or birds or amphibians, of course, right? Like you can just have a fertilized embryo outside of the body of the animal. So you can just take it, right? You can just do that. Of course, in order to obtain the eggs, most likely you will have to buy them from a farm. So there is animal exploitation involved with that. The most dubious part is if you're going to use embryos. When it comes to mammals, you can't really. There's no egg.
Yeah.
So usually it would be stuff like IVF and such. So like essentially those are the based on what I know, right? And based on what I've seen, those are the two techniques you can use in order to obtain stem cells.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so for some people, like it may be less vegan essentially to let's say there would be more violations of interest in bodily autonomy if you were going to make lab-grown meats with a mammalian embryo compared to, I don't know, like, a chicken.
Okay, so any species that sort of is an egg-laying species, it's sort of quote unquote more ethical to have lab-grown meat of that sort of species.
Just based on the fact that the embryo is much more easily accessible.
Yeah. Okay.
By
So,
default. So, just to be clear with the audience, I still have limited experience when it comes to lab-grown meats, of course, because I haven't stayed in the company for long. And of course, that's just one company among many others. So, if you want to learn more about how that actually works in practice, what I would recommend is checking out essentially an organization called the Good Food Institute. If you haven't heard of it. And what they do is that they work on how do we produce food more ethically, and especially when it comes to proteins. So they will encourage projects such as plant-based alternatives, mushroom-based proteins, but also lab-grown meats. And so there's a lot of resources nowadays when it comes to where the field is at. So you'll have lots of information that's way more accurate than anything I can present. But it will also provide you a lot of information on what kind of careers are necessary for that kind of stuff.
Okay. So that's
what kind of skills, what kind of expertise you're looking for when it comes to making the field progress as effectively as possible. So yeah, I'm not a figure of authority. I don't really know shit about this topic. Like just forget everything I said. Go check out what they did. It's much better than everything I say.
You're so humble, Uridoz. Did you get the job at the plant-based or the lab-grown foie gras company?
So no, I left after a month and a half because I think it was a combination of me not being very efficient and experienced enough. Probably because, hey, at the time I had completely undiagnosed ADHD. And also, like with some of the team members, like we weren't getting along. With some of them, they had no problem with me whatsoever. With some others, the chemistry just wasn't there. So I didn't want to essentially force myself in. So they ended my trial period, and then a few months later, I found another job, which I can also talk about, and I still have it to this day. So we can talk about that perhaps.
No, I would love to talk about that job. Let's just for people who aren't intrinsically interested in biology in the same way I am. Why don't we speak a bit about AV? So AV Paris is now the chapter that you co-organize. But like, what was your experience? Like, sort of, presumably you did AV in a much smaller town, and then you moved to Paris, which is the capital city of France. Like, what was your experience swapping from one chapter to another?
To be honest, and like that may be disappointing, but like Avignon may be a city that's like more than 10 times smaller than Paris. It doesn't mean that you have 10 times more activists in Paris at every cube. So I would say the multiplying ratio is probably 2 or 3.
Okay.
Although to be fair, in Avignon, I was there at a time where the local chapters in southern France were really supportive of one another, and so people from nearby cities that also had chapters, such as Nîmes or Montpellier, had activists actually doing the move to go there. And so there was a situation where they would do it on purpose to have their cubes at different moments of the month.
They'd stagger them, yeah.
Yeah, and so activists would, if they go to every cube and they do the trip by train and such or by car, activists could easily do like 3 cubes per month or even 4 sometimes.
That's amazing. That's what we do in the UK quite a lot. With like We the Free will do that in local areas, and I would imagine AV do that as well. That's very cool. And they definitely do that in London. I know in London you can basically go to an event like once or twice a day, I think, and they're all staggered separately. It's very good. But there must be more conversations in Paris, right? There must be more foot traffic in Paris, right?
There's a lot in the places where we go. So we tried different spots. We even tried some spots in the suburbs outside of Paris where you have to take the train to try to reach those outsider populations.
Okay.
But at this point, we realized that the bigger impact we have is near an area called Châtelet. So we tried different spots. We even tried to go to Galerie Lafayette, Haussmann, but twice already we had issues over there with people calling the police and such, which never happens for some reason where we do activism and there's even more people. So we just stay around the area of Châtelet and it works really well. So the thing is, I basically became an organizer because I wanted more activism to happen. I wanted more cubes, and I was just frustrated with just once a month. Uh, so I wanted to open my own chapter in a nearby city. And then we kind of talked it over, and we're like, yeah, nah, let's just do Paris, but we just like split up the work, and now we have at least twice a month, but sometimes it's 3.
Wow. Okay. So you sort of joined in the organizing team, which I think there's 3 of you, right?
There's actually 4, but the thing is, the thing is, we're not just as available as one another. So first of all, we have one of the organizers that can't come always because of their job, pretty complicated situation. And one of the organizers is actually the regional organizer for France and the French-speaking part of Belgium.
Okay.
So yeah, she's pretty busy.
Yeah.
So sometimes she can't necessarily come every time. But yeah, no, it's like we can still split up the work effectively, and it works out well. There's no issue organizing all of this.
And when did you start doing? When was your first ever cube you organized then? Like how long ago?
Probably in November 2023, I guess, at this point.
Oh, okay, so quite recently, like 7 months ago. Yeah, like 7 months ago. Okay.
Yeah,
and was that a solo event, or was that you sort of shadowing someone else, or how did that work?
Oh no, I had another co-organizer with me. I wasn't alone.
Okay.
Like here's the thing. I think people who start an AV chapter solo as an organizer in another city are fucking badasses.
They are. I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Because it's not easy to just like get into it, right? I did it because I want to help and I want more activism to happen. That was my main reason, not because I wanted any position of leadership. I just want shit to happen, and I think that's also the sentiment for most of them. Hopefully, I mean, you would. So,
yeah.
But yeah, like I'm not sure I would have had the courage to just straight up start my own chapter in a medium-sized city in France, necessarily. So, big up for anyone, like not just in AV, like for any activist group. Like if you're a leader in your city and you start a group on your own, with not much support from the outside world, that's badass.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. Like, and part of the reason that I was willing to sort of like, I sort of did the same as you, right? I sort of took over someone else's chapter. Or I started helping someone else run a chapter. But we have friends who've set one up on their own, and it is really inspiring to see people who just start it from nothing versus like assisting something that's already running.
Right. I did it easy mode.
Yeah. But you must have since then. You must have run like pop-up events, maybe like where you've traveled out of Paris and you've run an event in an area where they haven't had cubes before.
So we tend to stay in the city center overall. And it would be interesting to do stuff more so outside, for sure. I have times where I will go to other cities and I will be assisting the organizers over there, and so they can actually take a break and do a bit more outreach compared to usually, perhaps. Stuff like that.
That's really cool. So you ran your first event with your co-organizer, and was it what you expected, or was it easier than you expected? Like what were your expectations, I suppose, and then like how was it different to your expectations?
I think that the cube itself is the easy parts. The main habit to pick up is you have to be a bit more aware of your environment from time to time. Just making sure that all the activists are doing okay and such, and also making sure to ask people holding the screens if they need to swap, if they're okay. So that's something you have to keep in mind that you don't usually do when you're just an activist and not a co-organizer. So that's a new habit I had to pick up. But the activism itself, I knew how it worked. I did it many times over. I was close friends with co-organizers. I saw how they did it. It's just that there are some parts of it, when it comes to managing the material stuff, managing the specific screens that are used, all that kind of stuff. The managing the events, the Facebook page, all this kind of stuff. That's the stuff that I had to get used to. Speaking of which, I'm actually remembering that we have a cube coming up on Saturday, and I'm not sure any of us has made the request, has made the declaration to the city hall about this. So I might have to ask them about this.
Oh wow, you have to alert the council. Wow.
Yeah, you just have to make a declaration, and then they just sign it, and you can just present it to the police or anything if someone is like, "Hey, like, are you legally here?" Yeah. It's not that
Wow.
difficult. They're not that difficult on it.
Okay, we're quite lucky in the UK. We don't really have to do that, but yeah, there are places where you do have to do that. It's interesting. I feel like we've skipped over something that I definitely should have asked you, because that's the whole point we're here, right? Like, at what point did you sort of realize that you were now part of like a bigger community? I suppose. At what point did you realize that you actually had quite a lot of vegan friends who you met quite regularly? Because I presume at this point you must, if you're running 2 events a week, you must actually be meeting vegans at least twice a month, right? Twice a month, sorry.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
twice a month. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think that the point where you start to realize that you're part of a community is just when you start to make genuine friends with people after activism, when you hang out,
yeah.
after you're done, whether you go out to eat or you go at one of the activist place who has a decently spacey home where
Mhm.
you can actually afford to have 14, 15 people coming in for an
Wow.
evening.
Uh-huh.
So I think that this is the point where I realized, yeah, like I kind of have this bigger community.
Uh-huh.
Definitely.
Yeah, and
Yeah, that's about it.
what is the most people you've had in a room as AV Paris? Like, because you say that like you only get about 2 or 3 times as many people as an Avignon event, but there must like the overall group size when you gather in mass must be bigger, right?
Um, yeah, I mean, not necessarily because I think that people in Paris also they tend to be busy people
Uh
also, and sometimes they don't necessarily live close to the city center where we do activism.
uh
So you have a significant amount of activists who will kind of leave early to like catch their train or catch the metro before it gets too late or stuff like that,
uh
or because they don't want to go home at fucking 11 p.m. or something.
Because you do night
So
events, right? You do evening events.
yeah, I mean, okay. So I've done some in the past. I think they're
Uh
really cool. I think one of the perks with such events is that the screens are very visible in the night.
huh.
So that's something really to take into consideration,
Uh huh.
especially in the summer.
Hmm.
There's something really interesting that Avignon does. There's a festival of a light show essentially every year that's called Lumos.
Hmm.
And what they do is that they will use projectors to show some really pretty visuals and paintings and art on famous monuments around the city.
Hmm.
And so that means that you actually have a lot of people walking around at night. So they do this in the month of August, I believe. And so
Wow.
during this month, during this festival, what they do, those insane bastards, is that they will essentially do 4 cubes per week on
Wow.
Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night.
Uh huh.
And they do it late at nights because usually people will do cubes in the afternoon, like 2 to 5 p.m. or 3 to 8 to 6 p.m. They
Uh
do
huh.
it late. I forgot the exact timing, but they do it late. And they actually get a bunch of attention thanks to that.
That sounds really cool. I kind of want
Yeah,
to come
just
for
it,
that. What is that? Just at a certain time period every year, or when is that? Is that
yeah, it's in
August? You said.
summer. Not, yeah,
Okay.
August, yeah, in summer.
Okay. And they run 4 events a week. You said.
Yeah, during the festival, they do that.
For how long's the festival?
I forgot. I mean, if you want to know, you actually have the organizer of Avignon, one of the organizers in your Facebook friends, so you could just ask.
When I get my passport, I might come for that. That sounds like an efficient use of my time, right? Like come to Avignon and do 8 days of activism in a 10-day period. That sounds amazing. Oh
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
there's also Wine Them Month,
Oh
that kind of stuff.
yeah. True, true.
For people who don't know, One Dem Month is an event in Amsterdam where essentially you have pretty much cubes every day
Yeah,
in the city center for a whole month.
yeah. They're doing it
It's
for a
insane.
month this year. Yeah, I genuinely am interested to see if anyone comes and does the whole month. Right, that would be that would be impressive.
I
Um,
agree.
but I'm sure some people will come for like a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah, a lot of people do that, and I think
Yeah,
it's still cool. And
it's cool.
like you gather with a lot more activists than you would in other circumstances.
Yeah, and it's a chance to meet the global community, right? Like we have a communal friend who went there last year, from Texas, and
Hmm.
they met people I know, right, from England, and they met people from France probably. They
Yeah,
all met each other, and that's kind of cool, right? That's a very cool thing that I'd like to do one day. Um,
yeah, just a typical yearly cult gathering.
yeah, right. We love the cult gathering. So I can't have you on and not speak about your job because your job is amazing. So you are a very interesting person that I know in that you do activism, you organize activism, you're part of your local vegan community, but you also have a job that is essentially, to some extent, like, you know, aiming to reduce animal suffering, right? Like, it's not the Frog Wow Company. It is. Dum.
Okay, so basically, I'll explain. So basically, my current job is I'm helping with a project of a PhD student who's trying to improve a model that is essentially aiming to replace animal testing when it comes to studying a specific part of the kidneys. So essentially, when we talk about cell culture has evolved a lot throughout the years. It started with just like a 2D layer of cells on a petri dish, and that's it. To having a more of a 3D structure with scaffolding and everything. So you can actually start to replicate tissue on certain levels. But the thing is, there was an issue for a long time of when you start growing like a mass of cells, because there's no vasculatory system or anything. The issue that the center mass of the cells are kind of getting asphyxiated from all the cells around them, just taking all the nutrients. So you can have necrosis from this shit. It's kind of bad. But there's a lot of progress that has been made in 2 different fields that I'm more so familiar with, although I might be forgetting a bunch of others. First of all, there's organoid research. Essentially, you're growing mini organs. So you can do this from human cells. So I talked about the fact that you can turn cells back into stem cells by modifying them. You can do this with human cells. And you can essentially make them trace back all of the differentiation process to reach any organ that you're looking for. So the analogy I like to use is, like you're in an RPG and you have like a level 1 adventurer and they don't really have anything specific to them. But then like at some point they can go into either like warrior, mage, or archer, and then you make them go into the warrior category, and then okay, you're gonna pick swordsman, okay, and then what? Okay, yeah, gladiator, that kind of stuff. So they specialize more and more with not necessarily any way to go back necessarily. And so you can use that. You can essentially recreate the embryo development for certain tissues by giving the cells the proper cues, the proper media, the proper proteins and molecules to simulate them in the right way to reproduce any tissue you want. So that can be used for organoids, as I explained.
Okay.
So to this day, for example, you can grow a heart muscle tissue in the shape of a ball, and it actually beats. Like it's actually active. Yeah, we can do that nowadays.
How big is it? How big are we talking? Are we talking like
it's very
very tiny?
It's tiny. Yeah, it's tiny. You can look into it if you want.
Is it like smaller than a piece of rice, or how tiny are we talking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But we can grow bigger. But usually, it's smaller than a grain of rice. But it's still interesting because you can still do pharmacological testing, toxicology on them. So you can do a bunch of stuff.
Okay. Because it's the cells that's important. It's not the entire organ that's important. It's the cells of the organ that you're interested in.
Yeah, the type of cell and how they interact. And what's interesting is that you can actually grab a patient who has some kind of genetical condition, and you don't really know how it messes with their tissues. So let's say someone has a genetical condition that's, I don't know, messing with. We talked about the hearts, so let's go with that. So you can essentially grow a mini heart by essentially turning the cells into stem cells, and then you turn that into a mini heart, and you can see how it behaves differently from hearts from healthy patients.
Okay.
And you can see how it responds differently to different types of stress, or maybe, hey, you can test this drug to see if it works better, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm really dumbing it down here because it's much more complex than that.
I appreciate
that. The other type of model that has been developed is what we call an organ on a chip.
Okay.
So the way it works is that you have a 3D structure in which you have little tubes that go into it, and you can grow cells inside of those tubes. And the thing is, you can make those tubes kind of hug each other at some points, with a permeable membrane in between them. And so you can essentially make cells cover both sides of a separation between those 2 tubes, and you can essentially recreate the structure of certain tissues.
Okay.
So a very common example I give is the lung alveola. So we're talking about essentially the functional unit of the lung. When you really zoom in on the lung, especially at the bottom, you have little sacs that can inflate and deflate, and you have epithelial cells that cover this, that allow oxygen to go in and CO2 to come out.
It's the bumpy bit of the lungs, right? Lungs are really large surface area, so that they interact better with the stuff inside them, and it's the bumpy bits, right?
Yeah, it's a bunch of very small balloons, essentially made out of cells, at the very bottom of your lungs, like at extremities, and it's there that you will have an exchange between your blood and the air, essentially. And so what you can do, for example, is you can have a chip where you have one channel at the top that you fill with air with a certain humidity and a certain concentration of oxygen that replicates what would happen in your lungs. At the bottom of that channel, you can cultivate epithelial cells that you would find lining the inside of your lungs at this spot. And then you can have a permeable membrane under those cells, and even under those cells, then you can have endothelial cells that are the cells that make up the inside of your blood vessels, including when they're very tiny and they allow a lot of exchanges. And so essentially, and through that canal at the bottom, you can circulate something that is a liquid that essentially mimics blood.
That mimics blood, yeah. So you've built like a virtual, not a virtual, but like a fake lung. You've built like a fake, very small part of a lung, including the blood.
Yeah, it's called the lung on a chip, essentially.
Yeah.
It's a, I guess, a lung alveolar on the chip. And you can do testing on that. Like you can use human cells, and you can, for example, put an aerosol into the air from the channel above with air, and you can see how much of it goes into the blood. Does it damage the tissue? All that kind of stuff. So you can essentially do testing on that to give you a better idea as to how human tissue may react in different circumstances. And the thing is, because there's no nervous system or anything, you can just test on that instead of testing on poor mice and rats. And because they're human cells, in some ways the results you're getting from this are, yeah, exactly, they may be more accurate than what you're getting with rats and mice. There's a lot of situations in clinical research where you don't even get to the clinical parts. I mean, just early on. So just to be clear, clinical is when you're testing on the humans. Preclinical is any studies that you're getting information on a drug and how it can interact with the tissue before you get to humans. So that can involve cell culture, that can involve computer modeling, that can involve testing on animals. And so the idea is that you can have a better idea in the preclinical phase as to what is going to happen when you move on to the clinical phase when it comes to specific functions and specific tissues. Because a lot of the time you're going to test a drug on mice and rats and everything is working fine. And as soon as you move to humans, oh, it's toxic, or oh, it doesn't do shit.
Yeah. It's a famous quote. I do anti-vivisection with an organization, and one of their famous quotes is like, "We've cured cancer in mice, but not in humans because we test everything on mice." So yeah. But so, like, hypothetically, speaking of vivisection, there are lovely places in the UK where they get dogs and they put them in a room and they burn 100 cigarettes or whatever to test the effects of cigarettes on the insides of a dog's lungs. You could presumably just burn a cigarette next to your epithelial cell and see what happens, right?
Yeah, essentially you could do that and see how it affects it. Yeah, so you could definitely do that. Although, to be fair, there's a limitation, which is that it's like it can be an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is that you have a very simple system where you can have a high throughput. That means you can replicate it a lot, and you can have a lot of similarities, a lot of consistency. The problem, and you can also look at the input and the output. Like, for example, you can actually measure what goes in real time through the liquid, after you put something in the air, for example. So you can do a lot of measurements that you wouldn't be able to do it in vivo. However, there's another aspect, is that it's lacking the systemic aspects of an organism, because your body's it's not just individual tissues and types of cells that are just in isolation. They interact with each other in many complex ways. So it can be good to understand simple mechanisms, but there's a limitation of, hey, but like, how do we figure out how those two tissues interact together? And so the potential future of those kind of models is essentially to connect chips to one another that would actually mimic different tissues.
So you would see like the effects of the lungs, like carrying it to the blood, and then where the blood would go next. So if the blood went to, say, an organ or a muscle tissue, then you would then see what happens when that blood goes through a fake organ or I suppose a real organ or a real muscle tissue, right? That's on a different chip.
It can get crazier than that, because you can actually connect, for example, the lung to a liver on a chip, and then you can see how the liver will metabolize whatever drug was pumped into the blood through the lungs.
Yep.
And you can see, what metabolize is going to create, because sometimes a substance is not toxic by itself, but your body will turn it into something toxic. So that can happen sometimes.
Wow.
There's also, and then you can look at how those metabolites affect other organs.
Uh-huh.
And there's also the topic of, hey, how are those components evacuated?
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to my specific project, for example, we're looking at recreating essentially the barrier that separates in your kidneys your blood from what is an early form of urine. It's the first step of forming urine. It's
Mm-hmm.
to just filter blood and to make sure that your cells stays inside of your blood, your protein don't leak out too much.
Mm-hmm.
But you want some of the water and the smaller elements to leak out, and then later on in your kidneys, in a structure called a nephron, you can look this up, or maybe you can put it on screen at this time so people can look it up. But the idea is that your kidneys function a bit like what you do when you clean up your fridge. Is like you kind of take a lot of it out,
Uh-huh.
and then you put back in the stuff that you want to keep, not the trash.
Okay. Interesting.
So, so,
So sorry, go on.
so we're working on that. We're
Okay.
working on essentially trying to improve models of this specific part of kidneys, which is crucial
Mm-hmm.
uh, on the chip.
And this company that you work for, how sort of like early on is it in where it aims to be? Like, is it in its infancy, or are they, how are they dreaming of being much bigger, or?
So it's not a company.
Uh-huh.
I'm working with a university,
Okay, okay, okay.
so it's public funding. I would say when it comes to my specific lab, when it comes to my skill set and with a team, like it's kind of early on.
Uh-huh.
However, the approach of the PhD student that could definitely have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
So my job essentially is to take care of the cells and to cultivate them and to put them on chips.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to run the analysis to make sure that the cells have differentiated properly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm starting with stem cells, right? Like they're completely neutral. They don't know what they're doing.
Uh-huh.
So I have to give them the proper treatment for them to figure out what they're supposed to do and
Uh-huh.
what kind of cells I want them to become.
Uh-huh.
And then there's also the step of characterizing those cells to figure out if they actually did what you wanted them to do.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, a lot of testing around this essentially. If I had to
So you
summarize my job, it's mostly that.
so you're still sort of working out like the best way to sort of do it on a larger scale. Would that be a fair way to say it?
It's
Or
not so much the larger scale because there's
uh-huh.
already. So just to give you a history, when it comes to organ on a chip as
Uh-huh.
a model, the whole trend kind of started around 2015.
Okay, so about
So
9 years ago.
yeah, 9 years ago. The thing is, like the field is still in its infancy in a lot of ways,
Uh-huh.
um, but it's improving. It's getting promising,
Mm-hmm.
and the thing is, it's not necessarily about the scaling. Although, like since 2015, a lot of companies have started getting into that and proposing, tools for that. So it can be automation, it can be microscopes, measurement tools that can allow monitoring and
Mm-hmm.
live monitoring of many different things about what's going on in your chip. When it comes to um, for instance, having many chips at the same time that you can control over. So
Mm-hmm.
that's we didn't start scaling up yet, but the tools are there.
Mm-hmm.
They're expensive, but like they exist. We're more so trying to work on designing chips that essentially replicates that part of the human body more realistically.
Okay, so like branching out, and so you can cover more of the body, right? So you can
Yeah.
do more different areas of the body.
No. It's the same part. It's still the filter between
Okay,
the
okay, okay.
blood and the early form of urine. It's just trying to make this part better
Okay, okay,
because
okay.
the models that exist are not perfect.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
The idea is that if people develop a better model
Uh-huh.
that is more accurately recreating this part of the human body, then at this point there's a point in scaling it up because if you show that it is pretty good at doing its job,
Yeah.
then if you want to do any proof of concept, scaling,
Uh-huh.
or if you're actually going to use it in research in partnership with hospitals and stuff like that,
Uh-huh.
then at this point you need to scale it up, and so you need that. So we've been looking into that,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, like it's still a lot of early work.
Yeah, so it's more about like sort of getting it to work like sort of as accurately as possible for the area that you're currently looking at, which is the kidneys.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you're having new chip designs,
Uh-huh.
you don't want to do like 80 chips like those just to figure out that the design doesn't work for something that you could not expect until you tested it.
Yeah, yeah,
So you have to be at a small scale as to not waste an enormous amount of money.
yeah, yeah. I so 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 we're sort of I suppose reaching towards the end. And it's this point where I'd ask you, like, sort of, what are you excited to see next? And for you, that's like a big question, right? Because there's like your activism, and then there's like this, I would also call it activism, but it's, the career sort of or job that you're currently pursuing. And then there's other things that you might want to do. I don't know if you're interested in getting into other fields or if you're interested in doing other things activism related, but sort of what are you sort of looking forward to in the near future?
So activism, definitely want to keep doing that. I want to do a shout out, like theory crafting, unironically, to your audience. If there's some people who are studying some form of biology, or perhaps you guys can get into food science, a very effective way you can have to reduce a lot of suffering in the world, assuming that shrimp are most likely sentient, is to work on a project of lab-grown shrimp or plant-based shrimp.
Okay.
So if you can have a career in cell culture or food science that can help with this kind of project, you could have an enormous impact through your career. Me personally, well, I intend to keep doing activism. I intend to continue recruiting people, continuing to encourage people all throughout the world to continue doing activism. Not just for the animals, but also because, like, hell, like, it's a lonely world as a vegan, and it's important to stick together and to support one another.
Yeah.
So I think that even for our mental health and our ability to keep pushing in life, it's an important thing to do. And when it comes to my personal career, yeah, like I might still work in this place for a while if I have another contract to keep going. I think that would be interesting. Otherwise, yeah, organoids are pretty cool. So maybe I'll look into that. Although I'm not entirely sure that my skill set could definitely apply to it. But yeah, like I'm curious. I'm still open to opportunities.
I have a bunch of questions for all three. So, firstly, shrimp. Is that just because of the numbers of shrimp that people eat?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a website called the Shrimp Welfare Project.
Okay.
You can look it up on Google. And essentially, yeah, like the sheer numbers of animals that we kill overall, like they're already astronomical when we bring it up, right? Like you could probably give them a few numbers off of the top of your head as to how many animals we kill each year when we talk about land animals, for example.
Yeah.
Or when it comes to fish, we can't even count them because it's just by the ton.
It's by weight,
right?
yeah.
By weight, because we can't even we can't imagine how many of them we're killing each year. But the thing is, there is some non-negligible evidence that arthropods, so we're talking crustaceans, insects, arachnids, they may be able to suffer. There's evidence for that to the point where the UK government, I believe, has banned the practice of boiling lobsters alive.
Yes. Quite recently, I think.
Which is a good thing.
Yes.
So the thing is, if they are likely to be sentient, even if the odds are just at 10 or 20%, we kill many, many, many more shrimps each year compared to fish by far. So the Shrimp Welfare Project, I think they go into the statistics. You can look into that. So unironically, if you can replace the usage of shrimp on the market with a more eco-friendly alternative that tastes the same and can give people some decent proteins, I don't care how you do it. You can do animal cells. I think from a utilitarian standpoint, even if we have to take some shrimp embryos, like it's 100% worth it compared to the sheer amount of victims that you could prevent. There's you can do it plant-based, you can do it mushrooms, I don't care. But like if you can get this to work, you could have it in a more enormous impact on the world. Even assuming there's only I don't know, like a 10% chance that those are sentient beings that can suffer. I think that considering the number of shrimps that are exploited and killed every year for human consumption, that alone makes this investment worth it.
Yeah, because presumably they're in the trillions, right?
Oh yeah, like it's a number that our human brains can't even comprehend.
Yeah,
I can't pull out the number from the top of my head, but it was brought up. People brought it to the spotlight in a French podcast that is an anti-speciesist podcast called "Comme un poisson dans l'eau," which is translated in English as "like a fish in the water."
Okay.
And they brought up this issue. So they don't like the podcast is. It talks about speciesism in general. Like the name of the podcast may indicate that it's focusing on aquatic animals. That is not necessarily the case. But recently they did an episode with people who work in this project, the Shrimp Welfare Project. And yeah, when it comes to both shrimps that we farm or the ones we catch in the wild, the number of victims is unimaginable. So yeah, definitely something that people should be looking into if they can do that. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there just in case. You know, you never know.
Yeah, I work a lot with the Humane League, and they mostly focus on animals that are farmed in the most individuals. So they mostly focus on fishes and chickens. I might have a talk with them about shrimp.
Yeah.
Not that I'm particularly influential, but I'll at least seem intelligent if I bring up the subject. So I might do that. So thank you for that. I will definitely speak to someone
Yeah, you're
about
welcome.
it.
You're welcome.
Thank you for making me look clever. So, are there any plans for you to sort of become a bigger influence in AV, or is that just you're going to keep going at the same level?
Um, yeah, I mean, I want to keep going at the same level because, like, if I was going to get more involved in AV,
Mm-hmm.
it's either I do more cubes and I move around a lot more, which is not necessarily luxury I have.
Yeah, yeah,
Like the thing is, when you take care of cells in cell culture,
yeah.
there are times where you have to take care of the cells every day. It's like a pet where if you don't feed them for a day, like they die or something.
A companion animal. You have companion cells.
Exactly. Um, so the thing is, I can't necessarily move away from Paris. I had moments during the previous months where I would have to go to the lab on Saturday morning and then go do activism in the afternoon,
Wow, it's dedication.
and then I have to go back on the next day on Sunday. So that's not necessarily an option with my current job.
Uh-huh.
And there's also the fact that I'm kind of working on the French version of Elwood's organic dog meat,
Oh yeah.
which is called Le Ferme Bernier. So with a few people, we have a Facebook page, an Instagram page. We're
Wow.
working on a website right now.
Uh-huh.
So hopefully we can scale that up. So the thing is, I'm already quite busy, and if I had to get more involved with AV at this point, the higher up position would be regional organizer.
Uh-huh.
And I know the person closely, and I see it's a lot of work, and I could not handle this. I don't even know how she does it.
We're sort of over time, but fuck it, let's sod time. Elwood's dog meat. I'm very interested. Have you actually spoken to the Elwood family, or are you just doing this on your own?
Oh, yeah. So, it was kind of both because
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
the thing is, at some point Molly Elwoods, that's a creator.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
went to the UK last year, I think, and she did a campaign where it's like, oh, now we sell it in the UK, and so she did the activism over there
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
because originally it comes from the US, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I thought to myself, why don't we just make a French version? So like just for essentially, I went to talk to her,
Uh-huh.
and she gave me access to a copy of the Canva file
Uh-huh.
that they had for the leaflets, and so I made a French version with a guy called Berry, who is in a French anti-species community called Le Projet Méduse, the Jellyfish Project.
Okay.
And so we kind of did that, and I started. So there's some of them in my building. I gave it to other animal rights activists who also like the idea.
Uh-huh.
So that was the first version. And I even went to a yearly event, a huge yearly event in Paris called the Salon de l'Agriculture, the Salon of Agriculture.
Okay.
It's a big meeting where it talks about agriculture, like plant agriculture, but also animal exploitation, animal
Uh-huh.
agriculture. And so I went in front of the event with plant-based meats, and I essentially did with an association called Future Association.
Uh-huh.
Essentially, we did a dog meat tasting with a microphone, interviewing people, see what they think about it.
Wow. How did that go?
So that was interesting. And now the idea is that Molly got me in touch with the person who was working on work in progress version of Elwood in France.
Okay.
And so she didn't really have much time for the project, but she already did a lot of progress for like a decent website.
Uh-huh.
But she's very busy in her own life. She's actually quite an interesting person to talk to in herself. Maybe she's worth interviewing.
Yeah, definitely. Hook me
um,
up. I'll do it.
but essentially, we started just working together, and it's been very fluid. Like there was no misunderstanding whatsoever.
Uh-huh.
There was no like idea of like who's ruling, or anything. It's just like working together to make it work.
Uh-huh.
And so I have a Discord server with a few friends where we share ideas and we do stuff. So Facebook account where I made posts, and I already had opportunities to do outreach with
Uh-huh.
people who were shocked, and then they understood like it wasn't real.
Uh-huh.
And then I actually engaged in conversation on Facebook with people through text, and yeah, like some people genuinely thought, yeah, it's not really fair what we do to other animals, and they considered like genuinely going vegan.
That's
I'm not even
amazing.
joking.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because like, France has a bit of a like sort of a stereotype of just fucking animals, right? Like just like the things that French colonial stuff does to animals is not great, but they also are stereotypically like in love with their dogs, right? Like there's the cliche Frenchman or Frenchwoman with a tiny dog that they carry into restaurants and they sit and eat with. So
Right.
Does Elwood's work particularly well? Like, do you think in France?
So I think there's a lot of potential for that. Like the local vegan community thinks it's really fun, and it's a good way for them to be able to role play as carnists for once. It's good for mental health. Uh, and so yeah, the main goals I have in mind for this project right now is, number one, we have to finish the website. Number two, we have to update the leaflets with the website on it. And then number three is starting to distribute the leaflets in the streets in some areas. Maybe have like a hat and a T-shirt, like some merch for the summer. So that's something I could work on when I have more time. But hey, life's busy.
Yeah.
And my dream, my absolute dream, is to have essentially a organic dog meat stand next to a park in Paris where a lot of people go walk their dogs. And it would just be conveniently nearby, and essentially we would do some
marriage.
Yeah, just do some marriage, like just hey, do you want to try dog meat? Like oh, don't worry, they're not pets, they're meat dogs. They're being bred for purpose. So like that's a dream, but hopefully someday, I don't know.
That sounds good. I mean, I think that's not an overly unreasonable dream. Like, you're not dreaming of something like massive, right? But that sounds like quite doable. That's very cool.
And the thing is, there's a few people in Paris among the activists I know who would definitely be down for that stuff. So they would 100% show up.
Yeah, I've started seeing people do dog meat, like Elwood's dog meat, like protests around the UK. Like, there's a few popping up, so I can totally see that sort of being a thing that you get to do soon, or in the near future.
Fun fact: Vegan Gaze. She has a YouTube channel. You can look her up. She actually, I know her, and she actually met up with Molly face to face in the UK, and they did dog meat tasting together.
Yeah, I think I saw that was in Cambridge. I think, or Norfolk maybe. I'm not sure actually. Go on.
And even in the US, they have the stands, like they do this since a while. So yeah, a bunch of good content creators, and like they actually film situations in Outreach where you have people who at first get really fucking angry. Like, like, fuck you, like, you're dogs, but like it just cuts short, and like it just shows like a later moment where the person is basically in tears and saying, well, it's true, because like when you think about pigs, like we know they're really smart and emotional animals, and like it actually gets them thinking.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful to see that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then go on,
organic
last one.
Dog meat.
Yeah, and then
go on, sorry.
My last one was your job. So you're not fixed with this forever, but you think you're presumably always going to stay in this field, right? The future of Uridoz's career is some sort of, like, hopefully animal suffering reduction career in some sort of biology lab.
Hopefully. I mean, my contract essentially ends around the end of the year. So at this point, I'll have to, maybe take a little break and decide, okay, what do I do now? But I mean, hopefully I can find a job in Paris, even if it's not necessarily in the field. If it's a job that can make me some money, I don't know, I could do tutoring. I've done that in the past. I like it. So I could go back to that for a few months, and that could allow me to stay in Paris and perhaps do even more activism. We don't know.
That's amazing. Well, thank you ever so much for letting me interview you. You really are one of the most interesting people I know, so I'm really glad you let me do this. And I just wanted to say, go on, I'll end with, you really were like one of the people who got me into activism. Like, watching you post your pictures of AV cubes on the internet, sort of once every month or twice every month, was part of the reason I decided to go out and join in. So I'm really glad that you did that, and I'm really glad that you are the amazing person that you are.
And arguably, I think you're doing that at an even better scale than I am at this point, because I'm just doing that kind of stuff on some small communities, like of small Discord servers and such. As far as I'm aware, you're promoting your activism to hundreds and hundreds of vegans on Facebook at this point.
That's what I'm trying to do, and I'm showing off the best people. I'm waving the best people in their faces, like my good friend Uridoz.
Yeah, so I think that, like, you tell me like I'm awesome, so like arguably I think you're probably inspiring more people than I am to this day. If we really look at the numbers, you know what I mean? So like, if I'm awesome, you're awesomer, okay?
Oh, so wholesome. We're so wholesome. Oh.
Just like objectively speaking, okay? It's just mathematical, okay?
Do you have any closing remarks you want to make?
Yeah, the closing remarks is that there are meat dogs that exist, but German Shepherds are friends. So if you ask anything about eating German Shepherds, you're a piece of shit. Yeah, they're friends. Because we had people asking about eating German Shepherds, and they're crazy. I don't know why those people would ever think about eating German Shepherds. They're pets.
Oh, yeah. I love German Shepherds. Anyway, thank you very much.
I swore way too much.
That's okay. Swearing's totally okay. Anyway, I'm going to press stop recording. I love you, Uridoz.
I love you, Jess.